Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Gimel L'Miyas Hashem. Today, we will be learning Daf Kuf Samach Dalid Amud Aleph. In Chelik Gimel, Kuf Samach Dalid Amud Aleph is, I hate to even say it this way, but I'm going to call it a rare treat. I think it should be a relatively short share. If you take a look, there's very little Mishnah Berurah over here, primarily because from the previous page, there was a massive, very yesodistic Bir Halacha. I would encourage anybody who can to go through the Bir Halacha. I mentioned some pieces from it, but today we have Kuf Samach Daled Amud Aleph, not very long. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Shabbos. We're going to pick up today on the very bottom line of Kuf Samach Gimel Amud Beis, at the end of the line, Avol Kishe Yoidim. Our learning today should be as chus. V'achenu kol beis Yisrael hanesunim b'tzara b'shivya ha'imdim bein b'yom u'bein b'yabasha hamakom yirachem aleihem v'yotziem yitzara l'rvacha me'afela la'oiro u'mishibud l'geula hashta b'agolo v'zman kariv v'nemar amen. Our learning should be as chus refuah shalema. For Yeshua Levi ben Ahuva Malka Chana, for Yitzchak ben Tzion ben Dusha, Rivka bas Shiraleah, Chava Hadassah bas Serel, and for Gila Shifra bas Ilana Udal. They should all have a refuah shalema b'sayich shar chayla Yisrael, and we always daven to the Rabbeinu Shalom that b'schus the limud HaTorah of Klal Yisrael, the Rabbeinu Shalom should watch over every member of Klal Yisrael b'chol makom shehem. Okay, so in here Shin Chav Dalet Siman Shin Chav Ches Siv Dalet, the Mechaber told us about a malka shel cholol. A Makkah shel cholol, we learned about it already in Siv Gimel as well. A Makkah shel cholol, some kind of injury or wound or something that's affecting the interior, the internal organs of the body. We treat them in a very, very chomordik fashion, and you could be Mechal Shabbos for a Makkah shel cholol right away. In Sif Daled, the Mechaber told us, Ein it tzricha oimed. We don't have to ask any questions. We don't have to ask the Hatzalah fellow what his opinion is. You know, do you think we should be Mechal Shabbos or not? We don't have to go searching out a doctor. If it's a Makkah shel cholol, Ein it tzricha oimed. Nothing. We don't have to ask anybody anything. We could go right away, and we could do kol sheregilim laseis lo b'chayil. Anything that you would do for this chayil on a Wednesday, you're going to do for that chayil on Shabbos. Now, the Mechaber gives a little bit of a qualification to that, and the Mechaber says, Aval, however, kishe yoidim umakirim ba'osei chayli. If we know what that chayli is, if we could look at the symptoms of the ill individual, and we know what's going on, we know what it is, and we know makirim ba'osei chayli shemamtin ve'enoi tzar chilul. If we know that there's no need to be Mechal Shabbos, it might be that he's experiencing a relatively strong discomfort, and it seems to be a Makkah shel cholol. It's emanating from the internal parts of the body, but we know what it is, and we know it's not a big deal, and we know that having him wait is not going to cause any harm whatsoever. In that case, says the Mechaber, also l'chalolav afal pishu Makkah shel cholol. Then you're not allowed to be Mechal Shabbos. Shabbos is not a hefgevelt chas v'chalila. We're not going to say, oh, Makkah shel cholol, do whatever you want. No, I mean, you have, if you know that this pain that's emanating from the internal areas of the body, if you know very clearly what it is, and you know that there's absolutely no danger in waiting to do something till after Shabbos, then certainly you're not going to be Mechal Shabbos. Says in the Mishnah Berurah is cut in Tesvav at the bottom of Kuf Samach Gimel Amud Beis, Kishe Yoidim, V'choshkein Kishe Haroifei Ha'chayla Oimrim She'ein Tzarech. Also, I mean, if this person is experiencing pain and discomfort, and there is a doctor right there, and the doctor is a bucky, I'm not talking about, a first-year medical student. This fellow is Taka Bucky, and the Reife says, ain't Sarach. Listen, I know, it's uncomfortable, but there's absolutely no need to be Mechal Shabbos. Then, ein Mechalin. And we know about this illness that if you wait, it's not going to cause a problem. Ritzainer Loimar, the Mishnah Berurah is very careful over here. Ritzainer Loimar, what the Mechaber wants to say over here is Shemakirim bebirur. We know for certain, we're not playing around here, we know for certain that this illness is not going to get worse. Al Yedei Shenamtin ad halayla b'motzai Shabbos. We know for certain that there is absolutely zero risk in waiting till Motzei Shabbos. That's when we could wait. But if you don't know for certain, if there's a potential, there might be a risk over here, well, in that case, it's a Makkah Shel Chol. It's a Makkah Shel Chol, go be Mechal Shabbos. Moving along to Sifhei, says the Mechaber. Makkah she'eino shel cholol. If the makkah that we're dealing with over here is eino shel cholol, it's not something that affects any of the internal organs of the body, then nisholin bebaki ubachayla. So then, okay, person has some kind of a makkah, you need an assessment. You have to ask a baki, you have to ask a roife, ubachayla. You could ask the ill individual, how do you feel? If the ill individual says, something is very wrong over here, it's a different story. But you ask a baki or a chayla, or the chayla. If they ain't mechal on the love Shabbos, and you're not mechal Shabbos for this individual, ad sheyomer echad mehem shu tzarech lechilu. Unless one of them says, I got to go to the hospital. If the chayla says, I'm telling you, I'm the chayla, I'm the one that's suffering, right? If the chayla says, I'm telling you, I got to get to a doctor. So then you go ahead and you do what you have to do. If there's a baki, if there's a roife, and the roife says, this fellow, he better go to the hospital, then you go to the hospital. Then you're Mechal Shabbos. I'm not speaking strictly only about going to the hospital. If the chayla says he needs Chilul Shabbos, if the doctor says you have to be Mechal Shabbos to do something for him to keep him safe, then you go ahead and you do it. Or if it becomes Sakonis Tefashis. Now the wording of the Mechaber is a little bit funny, right? The Mechaber is talking about over here about a Makkah she'eino shel cholol. A Makkah shel cholol, the Mechaber was very strict about. Makkah shel cholol, Mechal Shabbos. Now he's talking about a Makkah she'eino shel cholol. A Makkah she'eino shel cholol is not as bad as a Makkah shel cholol. So by a Makkah shel cholol, you don't have to ask any questions. You don't got to go find a doctor. A Makkah she'eino shel cholol, go find a baki, go find a doctor, or at least ask the chayla himself. And you're not Mechal Shabbos until somebody says that you have to be Mechal Shabbos. Then the Mechaber says, or if this Makkah she'eino shel cholol becomes Sakonis Tefashis. Well, I mean, why does the Mechaber even have to tell me this? Of course, if it becomes Sakonis Tefashis, you're going to go be Mechal Shabbos. Explains the Mishnah Berurah that we have to read a little bit between the lines over here. Obviously, the Mechaber didn't say something that didn't need to be said. So says the Mishnah Berurah is cutting Zayin Sakonis Tefashis. Tzarech loimer, what the Mechaber meant to say was Safik Sakonis Tefashis. What the Mechaber is saying over here is Makkah she'eino shel cholol, generally speaking, we don't have to treat it so severely. We don't have to go run to be Mechal Shabbos unless the chayla says he needs it or a baki says that he needs it. Unless it's already becoming a suffix Sakonis Tefashis. If you already have a suffix Sakonis Tefashis, you're Mechal Shabbos. No questions asked. Suffix Sakonis Tefashis, you're Mechal Shabbos. Tzarech loimer, suffix Sakonis Tefashis. He said, Ritzayin loimer. And what he wants to say is, Dafilu oimrim rak shema yichbar alav ha'chayli v'yistakein. Even if the chayla or the roife or the baki says, look, it's possible, there is a risk here that it may get worse and he may become bisakana. In that case, be Mechal Shabbos. Do what you got to do. Be Mechal Shabbos. I didn't read it, but if you look at the end of Sifhei in the parentheses, the Ramah sends you to Taf Reish Yud Ches to the halachas of Yom Kippur. That's the halacha on Yom Kippur. The halacha on Yom Kippur is even if there's a suffix Sakonis Tefashis. You have an elderly person or an ill person and he's fasting, and the doctor says, I don't know, there's a suffix over here. Could be that if he doesn't eat, he's going to become bisakana. He's got to eat. He can't allow him to become bisakana. V'hu adin kan, the same halacha would apply over here. There's a Dirshu footnote over here that kind of caught my eye, and I'm going to mention it for a different reason than they mention it for. He brings down over here a question. Let me find it. Footnote number 21. The Dirshu footnote over here, they say, Ubetam hadovar shemechalalim Shabbos al suffix sakana. So it sounds like whoever wrote this footnote was bothered. Like, what's pshat that we're mechal Shabbos on a suffix sakonas nefashos. Well, why not? I mean, it's pekuach nefesh. V'chai behem, v'lo sheyamus behem. So it's not such a big kasha why you're mechal Shabbos for a suffix sakonas nefashos. But the way they put it over here is ubetam adavar shemechalim Shabbos al suffix ve'ein soimchin ala kosev shomer psaim Hashem. Why should we even be mechal Shabbos on a suffix sakonas nefashos? Shomer psaim Hashem. The Rebbeinu Shalom will watch out for us. Shomer psaim. The Rebbeinu Shalom watches fools. Shomer psaim Hashem. We'll follow the Rebbeinu Shalom. Kosav a kovit shiurim brings down even from Rabbi Chana Wasserman, Sechet Tzadik Levracha. Kosav a kovit shiurim Hashem yikam damai says over here. Kosav zeh ein kosav zeh oisik ela b'sakana she'adam ein yachal lihishamim mimena. Shomer psaim Hashem does not mean that just walk into the street and don't look if there are any cars coming. Shomer psaim Hashem. It's not what it means. No, you have a chiyuv of ushemartem ha'od l'nafshei seichem. You have to protect yourself. Right? You're not allowed to just go ahead and be a pesi. You have to do what you could do. Where does Shomer Psaim Hashem apply? Shomer Psaim Hashem applies to cases where you cannot protect yourself. There's nothing you can do. You can't protect yourself. Over there, the Rebbeinu Shalom says, Shomer Psaim Hashem. Ulam sakana shebiyada adam lishamim mimena. But if there's a sakana that you could protect yourself from, if you are mafkir yourself, if you don't protect yourself from things that you can protect yourself from, if you decide I'm not looking before I cross the street, then you can't apply the pasuk of Shomer Psaim Hashem. Shomer Psaim Hashem is when you can't protect yourself. What my Rebbe, Reuben Feinstein, Zal Zayin Gesund Stark Shlita, what he always says is, he says, you know where Shomer Psaim Hashem applies? I'll tell you, everybody uses Shomer Psaim Hashem all the time. He says, where? Well, you go to work, somebody goes to work in the morning. So he gets up, and he gets in his car, and he's driving to Manhattan. So he drives on the infamous triple cantilever section of the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway, which is one of the most heavily traveled and one of the worst maintained and in worst condition highways anywhere in the United States. You could look it up if you want. The triple cantilever section of the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway. It was built that way because they felt that they had no choice but to build it that way. It's an engineering debacle. It's in terrible shape. It has to be replaced. They know it has to be replaced, but they can't figure out what to do with the traffic while they work on replacing it. Nobody wants to bite the bullet and go ahead and take the plunge and do what's going to have to be done in order to fix it. So they keep on putting on Band-Aids. But everybody drives on the BQE all the time. Not only that, you get in the car and you're driving. How many people, you open up the window and you get the stink of weed getting into your car. So how many people that are driving at 75 miles an hour around you, how many of them are up to their eyeballs in weed? How many of them are drunk? How many of them were up all night? And you're moving together with these people at 75 miles an hour. It's poshut sakonas nefashos. So how are you allowed to do it? How are you allowed to drive? Tell you even more. The pasuk says that you have to be very careful to pay your workers on time. Says the Torah Dirshu, you know why? Ve'elov hu noiseyes nafshoy. Because you have an employee, and he risks his life for you. Says Rashi, what does that mean, that an employee risks his life? He says, well, people have jobs where they have to go climb high up into a tree to pick fruit off of a tree. So he's putting himself in sakana. He's climbing way up in a tree. Chas v'chalila, he falls down. He could get very badly injured or even worse. So he's risking his life to go put food on his table. So you have to pay him on time. Wait a second. How are you allowed to take such a job? How are you allowed to take such a job? So there are a lot of things that we do on a constant basis where you put yourself in risk. How are you allowed to do it? The answer is you're allowed to do it because Shomer Psaim Hashem. What do you mean? Stay home, right? Stay home and don't go anywhere. And then you'll be safe. No, you can't live that way. The bottom line is people have to go out and be able to make a parnasa. People have to be able to live in a normal fashion. Living in a normal fashion entails risk. It entails risk, but you're allowed to take those risks. because of Shomer B'Sam Hashem. Because those are considered risks that there's really very little that you could do to mitigate. You have to drive a safe car, Rabbi Isai. And Rabbi Isai, you have to drive safely. You're not allowed to drive like a Meshugana. And you see people on the roads nowadays, in certain very well-known Yiddish communities as well, Yidden behind the wheel, they drive like maniacs. And you're not allowed to. It's an Isser. You're not allowed to do it. Right? So you have to drive safely, and you have to do all the normal things to take care of yourself and to protect yourself. All the things that are considered normal hishtadlus, you have to do. Beyond that, you're allowed to falazach on Shomer B'Sam Hashem. And I'll show you, because it's a short day in the Mishnah Berurah, I can take the luxury. I'll show you what I think is a very cute riot to this. I learned Pshat in a pasuk a little bit differently than conventional wisdom, maybe a lot differently, but be that as it may, that is what it is. We all know the story of Yaakov Avinu and the stones, when Yaakov Avinu left to go to Lavan. So the pasuk over here says that Vayifka b'mokaim vayolen sham. Yaakov laid down kiva shemesh, because we know from Rashi and from Divrei Chazal that suddenly it became dark, so he went to go lay down to go to sleep. Vayikach me'avnei hamokaim. He took stones. Vayosem mirashoisav, and he put them around his head. Rashi says Vayosem mirashoisav ason kimin marzev saviv l'roshei. Out of the stones, he made like a half pipe going around his head. That means that he put stones around three sides of his head. So it's like a half pipe, right? Closed on three sides, open on one side. What did he do this for? He did it for Shmira, right? He was afraid of wild animals. So he did what he could in order to protect himself. Now let me ask you something. Because he has stones around his head, he's protected from Chayis Rois. Chayis Rois can't harm another part of his body. He did what he could. He had to sleep. He wasn't mechuyev to stay up all night. He had to sleep. But whatever shmira he could make, he had to make. So he made a shmira. He put stones around his head. Okay, so he did what he was mechuyev to do. Now his chilais merivai suimzu. The stones started to argue with each other. Each stone said, I want to be under the tzaddik's head. Miyad Asana Kadosh Baruch Hu Evanachas, the Rebbeinu Shalom turned them into one stone. Now, everybody learns this pasuk, at least this is the way they teach it to the kids, and that is that the stones did a wonderful thing. Each stone wanted to have the schus to be under the tzaddik's head. They started to fight with each other. The Rebbeinu Shalom said, mamash geschmack. Each stone wants to have the mitzvah of being under the tzaddik's head. I'm going to make them all an Evanachas so that they could all be zoichet to be under the tzaddik's head. It's a very big problem with that. Very big problem. First of all, nowhere here does it suggest that Yaakov Avinu put a stone under his head. Rashi says very clear. Asakim bin Marzi Savav L'Roshai. He put stones around his head. He didn't put a stone under his head. And yet the stones are arguing, I want to be under the tzaddik's head. The tzaddik didn't ask you to be under his head. He asked you to be around his head. Now, if one of the stones would have been zoichet to be under his head, or now that the Rebbeinu Shalom turned all the stones into one stone, and now the stones are under his head, guess what? He no longer has any shmira. He put the stones around his head for shmira because that's what he was mechuyev to do. The stones got up and argued with each other, I want to be under the tzaddik's head. The Rebbeinu Shalom came and made an ace that now they're one stone and they're under the tzaddik's head. Guess what? Now he has no shmira. Says the pasuk, V'hinei Hashem nitzav olav. He dreamed, and he dreamed that the Rebbeinu Shalom was over him. Says Rashi an interesting thing. Hine Hashem nitzav olav. One word in Rashi. Nitzav olav l'shamroi. The Rebbeinu Shalom was hovering over him to protect him. You know why? Because Shomer B'Sam Hashem. Now he needed shmira. When he did what he was mechuyev to do, he put stones around his head. He didn't falozach on Shomer B'Sam Hashem. He went ahead and did whatever he could do. He put stones around his head. But the stones went and got into a fight. The Rebbeinu Shalom turned them into one stone under his head. Now he has no shmira. V'hinei Hashem nitzav olav l'shamroi. Now, Shomer B'Sam Hashem, there was nothing Yaakov Avinu could do. It happened while he was sleeping. So Shomer B'Sam Hashem, Hinei Hashem nitzav olav l'shamroi. Now you should know that I hold that the stones got an einish for what they did. What was the einish? The einish was that when Yaakov Avinu woke up, he took these stones and he turned them into a matzeva. Not a mizbeach, a matzeva. A mizbeach is made out of multiple stones. A matzeva is one solitary stone. Now it's brought down that these stones were from the mizbeach of the Akedah. So that means that these stones were a mizbeach. Now they got turned into a matzeva. A matzeva is a lower madrega than a mizbeach, because the halacha is that a mizbeach is kosher. A mizbeach is kosher for zvachim. You could bring karbanos on a mizbeach. You could bring behemoths, and you could bring karbanos on a mizbeach. You could bring nisachim, but a matzeva is only kosher for nisachim. It's not kosher for a carbon, and that's why Yaakov Avinu, he poured shemen, he poured nisachim on the matzeva, because it wasn't kosher to be a carb for karbonis. It wasn't a mizbeach. It was only a matzeva. So that means that these stones went down in madrega. Originally they were a mizbeach, and now they became a matzeva. You know why? Because they messed up. They didn't want, the tzaddik put them around his head. They decided, I don't want what the tzaddik wanted. The tzaddik wanted stones around his head. We know better than the tzaddik. We want to be under his head. Yaakov never asked for that. That's wrong. They had no right to do that. And because of that, they went down in madrega. Okay. Weiter. Going to Siv Zayin. So going to Siv Vav. 3 lines down near the end of the line says the Mechaber. Maka shal gav hayad v'gav haregel. A maka, a wound, or some kind of an injury that's al gav hayad, on the back of the hand, v'gav haregel, or on the back of the foot. Now what does that mean? The back of the hand or the back of the foot? It's kedai to see over here the lashon of the Aruch HaShulchan. Because the Aruch HaShulchan, everybody from my share, I think by now knows how much I love the Aruch HaShulchan. The Aruch HaShulchan spells it out. The Aruch HaShulchan says, Maka she'al gav hayad v'gav haregel, v'hainu, hayad v'haregel, the part of the hand and the part of the foot, sha'acharei ha'atzba'is, that is after the fingers. So here you have the fingers, and then you have the part of the hand that's after the fingers. So we're not talking about fingers. We're talking about the part of the hand that's after the fingers. Now, which side, says the Aruch HaShulchan, Bitzad shalatzi pranayim, on the side of the nails. So we're talking about this part of the hand, and we're talking about this side, what we call the back of the hand, not the palm, the back. A makkah that's on the back of the hand, or the foot, what we would call the top of the foot. So it's the part that's acharei ha'etzbos, so after the toes, going closer to the body from the toes. And which side? The side of the toenails. So it's the top of the foot. That's what we're talking here. Talking over here about the back of the hand and the top of the foot. Makashal gavayad v'gava regel v'chein mi shabala aluka, or somebody who swallows a leech. V'chein mi shenishochai kelev shoite, or somebody who's bit by a rabid dog, or like the Aruch HaShulchan says, even by a suffix that it's a rabid dog. Oyechad mizaychali ofar hamamisim, or some kind of a creepy crawly. I don't know if it means specifically some kind of a lizard or any kind of a scorpion, any kind of creepy crawly creature that crawls on the ground, on the ofar hamamisim, that is capable of killing. Afilu suffik imemisim lav, even if it's a suffix, if it's deadly or not. Harehem kamaka shal cholol, that would be considered a maka shal cholol. Something somewhat common that would be included in this is somebody who gets stung from it by a bee, and he begins to exhibit symptoms where there's a possibility that he's experiencing an allergic reaction. So somebody gets bitten by a bee, and he doesn't feel so well, and then he starts getting something that looks like it might be hives. Run. That you would be Mechal Shabbos immediately, because that's definitely a suffix. it could be fatal. So that's it. You got to be Mechal Shabbos immediately. Very interesting over here where he says, V'chein misha bala aluka, somebody who swallows a leech. We had Gemara in Avodah Zarah. The Gemara in Avodah Zarah says that if somebody swallows chas v'chalila, a hornet, or I think a wasp, the Gemara over there says, somebody swallows a hornet, he should give his final instructions, but he should settle his affairs, because he swallows a hornet, he's a goner. So the Gemara says. I learned that Gemara, and the very next day there was a story in the news where a billionaire from India was at a party, he swallowed a hornet, very shortly after that he was dead. It was fatal. The young fellow swallowed a hornet, it was fatal. Chazal knew what they were talking about, Rabbi say. So if somebody swallows an aluka, that's something to be Mechal Shabbos over. Moving along to Sif Zayin, says the Mechaber. Mechal in Shabbos al kol makkah shenasis machmas barzel. A makkah, an injury that's caused by an iron or a metal implement, is something that you're Mechal Shabbos for. Val shchin haba befi hatabas, or some kind of a boil that's located at the rectal opening. A boil located at the rectal opening. I had a child who needed surgery from this. A boil that's located at the rectal opening could very, very easily, I think it's pretty easy to understand, it could very easily become badly infected. Val simta, or for a simta, which is also a kind of boil that could become infected. We know that there are sometimes something starts off and it seems to be a harmless pimple, but very quickly it could become infected, and those infections, depending on where they are in the body, they could very quickly progress to becoming cellulitis. Or somebody has a very high fever, or if he has a fever with the chills. These are things that you could be Mechal Shabbos for. Says the Mishnah Berurah, the Mechaber said that a makkah that's done with barzel, a makkah that's caused by something metallic, even if it didn't penetrate to the interior cavity of the body or to the interior organs, and it doesn't have to be like we said in Sivav. We don't have to be talking about the back of the hand or the top of the foot. It could be anywhere in the body. A wound that's caused by something metal is something, he says over here, that you would be Mechal Shabbos for. Now, there is talk. What exactly does this mean? I mean, we're not going to say that if somebody gets a simple cut with a knife on Shabbos, he was cutting his meat on Shabbos and he nicked his finger, well, that's a wound that was caused with a metallic object. So does that mean that you should run right away and you should go be Mechal Shabbos? It would seem not. I think that would probably fall into what we say, like in Sif Dalid, if it's something that you know that there's no chash sakana over here, it's kind of like a garden variety cut, then you don't run to go be Mechal Shabbos. I saw over here in the Aruch HaShulchan, the Aruch HaShulchan says, V'chein Mechal in Shabbos HaKol Makkah shenasis machmas barzel b'choizek hahakah al eza makom mehaguf. Sounds from the Aruch HaShulchan that he's talking about a stab wound. In other words, we're not talking about a simple, just, cut. We're talking about a makkah b'choizek. Sounds like a deep cut, like a severe laceration. Well, severe laceration, yeah. The severe laceration could be sakanos nefashos, especially depending on where it is in the body. He follows up the Aruch HaShulchan. He says, "V'yesh misha mistapik ibein dafka b'koyach, or yafilu shaloi b'koyach, v'lin nira dafka b'koyach." The Bir Halacha says, also brings down such a suffix. Does it have to be b'koyach or not? And he's not machriya. The Bir Halacha, certainly if somebody never experiences such a thing, if somebody gets a wound and the wound was caused by something metal and you have a question, it's something that should be asked very, very quickly. And certainly if there's any kind of suffix, if there's a suffix that cuts the fashis, you're Mechal Shabbos. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Cham b'yoyser eskat yutesu anikra b'loshen Ashkenaz typhus v'chadoima. A high fever, which the Rishivas Hatzal in the Igris writes that a high fever is over 102. Now, the Rishivas Hatzal also writes that sometimes we know what's generating the fever. If somebody has the flu and he has 102, we don't have to go run be Mechal Shabbos. But if somebody has the flu and he has 102 and he's having trouble breathing, Well, yeah, you can be Mechal Shabbos. If somebody has strep throat and he has 102, you're not going to run to be Mechal Shabbos. But if somebody has 102 and he has strep throat and he starts exhibiting other concerning symptoms where you're starting to worry, hey, wait a second, this might be a rapidly progressing infection, or the person has other underlying diseases, etc., again, if there's any kind of suffix sakana stafashis, suffix sakana, you are Mechal Shabbos. The Mishnah Berurah says im simur. If you have a fever that comes together with simur, what's simur? Miloshin tesamer saris besari, the pasuk in Eov, which means that the hairs on my flesh were standing up. V'hu nikra shuderin b'loshan Ashkenaz. This is called shuddering, trembling, chills. Shabah hakrirus v'hachamimus b'pamachas. The way the Mishnah Berurah explains chills is that the fever, which is heating up the body, is coming together with a cold sensation that's causing the chills at the same time. This is in contrast to what he calls like garden variety fever, where when the person starts not feeling well, suddenly he feels chilled, he feels cold. And then fever comes. That's not chayla sheyesh by sakana. But where the heat and the cold come at the same time, that is, even when somebody is a chayla she'ein by sakana, Yehudi, you're allowed to be mechal Shabbos. It's a little bit hard to flesh out from the Mishnah Berurah and everything exactly what all of these things mean, but people, I think, nowadays generally have a good sense and a good barometer for what's within the realm of the norm and the usual and what is out of the realm of the norm and the usual. Somebody's experiencing a very high fever and you have no idea what it's coming from. That's suspicious. That schmecks like there might be something internal going on. That could be a makashal chol. There might be some kind of raging infection. Then it's something you got to go run to a doctor. But again, if somebody has a bad cold and he comes up with a fever, he has 101.5, even he has 102, okay, so fine. He's not exhibiting any concerning symptoms. You're not going to go run to be a Mechal Shabbos. But again, I'm just going to emphasize, anytime there's even a suffix in Safkanos Tafashis, you are Mechal Shabbos. Sivches, bottom line, Kuf Samach Daled Amud Aleph, says the Mechaber, Mi she'achazoi dam, one who is suffering from some kind of blood ailment, makizin oisai afilu helech haraglav afilu b'yom rishon. The cure back in the days of the Mishnah, the Gemara, the days of the Shulchan Aruch, bloodletting was a major thing, and the condition that would prompt a doctor to do bloodletting was called Misha Achazai Dam. Somebody who's being overtaken by dam. Could be this means high blood pressure, hypertension. Could be it even means hypotension, dangerously low blood pressure. But that was considered definitely to be a very dangerous situation. We know that excessively high blood pressure and definitely a severe drop in blood pressure could be fatal. So if that's what Misha Achazai Dam means, and to do bloodletting is the refuah. Now, do bloodletting is Yisrei Daraisa. That would be you're being chayvel. You're making a wound and you're releasing blood from the body. That's the tilas neshama. That's an av malachas. This is Daraisa. But Misha Achazai Dam is considered sakonis nefashos, and therefore, yes, you'd be allowed to do an Iser Daraisa. So again, if it means blood pressure issues, very excessively high blood pressure, an excessive drop in blood pressure. So even though nowadays we would not do bloodletting, but there might be something else you would do, like rush him to the hospital. So, again, for these kind of conditions, which are definitely at least suffix sakonis nefashos, you're allowed to be Mechal Shabbos. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Makizin Oisai, Va'afilu al Yidei Yisrael. Even a Yid could do the Yisr Daraisa and do the Hakazas Dam. The Sakantu. V'machazai Dam b'miktzas u'minkar shurak mechash ba'al ma'aser. But if it's something relatively minor, there are people who get from various things a vasovagal response. They get a drop in blood pressure. So, okay, there are people who know that sometimes certain things happen, a certain thing could trigger them, and they could get a sudden drop in blood pressure, but it's not an extreme drop in blood pressure. It's an extreme drop. It's a drop in blood pressure that might make them feel, faint. So, okay, sit down, put your head back. Somebody get him a big drink and give him a big drink. That's not something that you would go run to be Machal Shabbos for. On the other hand, the person passes out, they go to take his blood pressure is dangerously low, Machal Shabbos. Okay, we should know from any of these things, nobody should need the refuas. Like we say all the time, the schus of limud HaTorah, the Baruch Hashem should be megan, and Gans Klal Yisrael, the Baruch Hashem should send Yeshuas, refuas, parnas, and shidduchim to all those who need. We should be zeicher to see the Biaskel, Tzedek, B'meher, V'yameinu, Amen. Be well.